everybody, and welcome to the Natural 20 podcast. I am your host, Joseph Newell, as always. And here on this podcast, we are talking about pen and paper role-playing games for beginners. Let's fun it up. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about, in our expert hearsay, Monte Cook and one of his more recent blog posts, where he talks about how he prepares and runs one of his Numenera sessions. It's a great insight that we're going to be delving into. In addition, we're going to be talking about D&D in our product review of the newest version, which is 5th edition, and if that'll work for a new group or players. And then in Brainstorm, we're going to talk about what the GM can do if he doesn't know what's going to happen, and how to be able to mitigate the table around these times of confusion. Expert hearsay. How more modern DMs tend to rebel against certain DMing philosophies of older style DMs. The idea that the DM is quote-unquote in charge of the session, and how they need to build out this entire robust, crazy world for the players, and know every tiny little detail inside of it, including what the mayor ate for breakfast this morning. So today, we're gonna take a look at the viewpoint of one of those older DMs, and see what they have to say. Now, the one we're going to be talking about is Monte Cook. As you might remember from last episode, he's the one who created Numenera, which is a game that I actually heavily recommended for newer players. Monte Cook is a very accomplished game designer. He's worked on hundreds of projects, including being a key player at Wizards of the Coast, working on the big mama of pen and paper role-playing games, Dungeons & Dragons. He's the founder of Monte Cook Games, that now makes both Numenera and The Strange. Numenera itself has won 10 ENnie Awards, ENnie Awards being the award system that is voted upon by the internet to recognize outstanding new additions to the pen and paper genre. On a recent blog post about a month ago in August, Monte Cook did a write-up of how one of his Numenera games that he runs went. Now, this is a really useful resource, especially for new players, and especially for new DMs, because it helps us understand what people that have a lot of experience, people that are experts in this, do to prepare for their games and how much they plan out. So, I'm going to read out a lot of his blog post. You can find the full version, I've linked to it in the show notes over on josephnewelldesign.com/natural20. That's Joseph NEWELL.com/natural20. He says, at the beginning of the session, following up on events that had happened previously, the PCs learned that an automaton that had been sent out into the world from a cloistered Gestalt entity had been waylaid by bandits. For complicated reasons, the PCs were motivated to help get it back, or more appropriately, get it back on its mission. The session began then with the PCs asking around at the nearby village to learn if anyone knew anything about these bandits and where their camp might be. There were a lot of in-game exchanges and a few interaction die rolls. In all, this probably took about 2 hours of the 4-hour session. This was important story and character building time, so it wasn't rushed. Next, the PCs used the information they had to find the bandits. They traveled to and scouted out the location. Once they had even more information, they made a plan. Again, this wasn't rushed. In character, the players discussed a lot of different options, and for the most part, that impatient let's just attack mentality that players can fall into was suppressed, which was a good thing, because next the PCs put their plan into action. Thanks to some clever use of ciphers and other abilities, the PCs took on a huge group of foes and dealt with them quite easily, remarkably easily, in fact. Now, just some quick notes for those of you who may not know. PCs means player characters, it means the people who are actually playing the game. And ciphers is an item system that Numenera uses, basically giving you really cool one-shot abilities, like, you know, I can walk through a wall for 10 minutes, and then the cipher goes away and you can never use it again. So, some interesting things that stood out to me in that post were that, number one, the PCs were motivated. Monty had helped the players to have a real emotional connection to the world, and so they had an understanding of their motivations for doing things. Number 2, things weren't rushed, and they didn't assault the bandit fortress right out. This depends on the group that you have. Some players really love interacting with PCs, interacting with NPCs, non-player characters, or characters that the GM takes control of. Some really love that. Some really love the progression of their characters. Others really love exploring a world, and others may love swinging a stick at something and taking their stuff. If you have a group where everyone just really wants to get down into the dungeon and murder everything inside and find cool loot, then alright, maybe you can do that. The important thing is that people have fun, right? However, many people, in fact I would say the majority of people, feel like doing things the way that Monty's group did, of having a lot of meaningful interactions with the world around them, the key word of that being action, is a more fun way of doing things. Now this is up to you and your group to figure out exactly what people want. Now, how can you figure that out as a new GM? Well, it's not rocket science, you don't have to read their mind. You ask them. You just simply say, hey, what is it that you want to get out of this game? And then you discuss that, and then as a DM, you can work in those kinds of scenarios into the game. Having a good relationship with all the players is dependent upon the things that make your other relationships work well. You have to communicate. Talk about what your players expect, what they want to have happen as a result of the game, and what they want to do while playing. Otherwise, it's going to be one person having a blast, everyone else gets bored, and then people aren't going to want to keep on showing up. The group dissolves, and nobody's having fun anymore. Something else that stood out to me at number 3 was where he said, thanks to some clever use of ciphers, those one-shot items that do cool things, and other abilities, the PCs took on a huge group of foes and dealt with them quite easily. Remarkably easy, in fact. So, this goes to a term used in a lot of literary senses called kill your babies. Basically, it says, don't get super attached to these big set pieces that you've built, to these amazing characters, or to these amazing situations that you've planned meticulously. Think about how it feels as a player to build a whole big plan and to meticulously plan out every detail and finding out all these cool pieces of information, and you work it all together to where you know that if you do all this, you will for sure beat the big baddie, and it's this culmination of all your intelligence and efforts and skills and progression through the game. And then, when the players put their plan into action, then the big baddie takes his hairless cat, strokes it as he walks into a spaceship, and blasts off to who knows where, completely thwarting the players' plans, and there was absolutely nothing they could have done to prevent that. That can be kind of frustrating for the players. And then later, they're tasked with fighting a super powerful lich, and the players stall him with conversation, getting him to get into villainistic monologues about how he's going to rule the world, while the rogue slips in behind and hits him with a backstab that critically hits 3 times, and he actually dies. He gets one shot. But you as the DM think, wait a minute, I have an entire campaign planned around this guy. I can't let him die yet. So I'm gonna make him turn into mist and then disappear, and they'll have to track him down again. So let's take a look at what these instances are actually teaching the players. So when they make this great plan, using all of their abilities and all the knowledge which they have, they put it into action, and what's the result? Everything happens the way the GM wanted it to. Well, that is essentially teaching them that their actions don't matter. It's saying, this isn't a world you can interact with. It's a story, and it's my story as the DM, and I'm gonna tell it, and you're gonna enjoy it. Well, that's awful. That's the worst. The reason why is because this removes one of the greatest strengths of role-playing games, There is a world. It is adaptable. Players are not fixed in a specific track, and they are free to make their own destinies. This isn't a movie. It's not a book. There is no plot. There's only actions and reactions. That's it. If we take that away from the players, we might as well just say, hey guys, here's this cool story I wrote. Let's go ahead and move on to what Monte said about how he prepared for that session. He says, my preparation consists of me jotting down a few basic ideas in a notebook or sometimes a file on my laptop. It's not an outline, just ideas to insert into the game. He then details exactly what he says, just a bunch of ideas. A helmet with organic eyes on the outside, a giant dinosaur monster with tentacles, a bandit camp with broken hounds, etc. Since the players have real motivations, like we talked about earlier, they will seek out ways to fulfill the goals that they have. And then Monte can take where they are going and interject any of these crazy ideas. Maybe while they're traveling, they run into a traveling mercenary with a helmet with working organic eyes on the front who has motivations opposed to those of the players. Maybe while they are searching out some way to fix their problem, the giant tentacle dinosaur monster crashes through the foliage and chases after them. Do you see what's happening here? It's not about a giant overarching plot that you have that's so cool that they have to run through X, Y, and Z hoops because. This is a world. It's a world that our imaginations fill in most of the details, and you as the DM are supposed to paint with very broad strokes and let the players imagine what they want. This is their world. You're just a narrator. You introduce complications that the players have to overcome. So much of your job is thinking, you know what would be cool if it were to happen right now? Then follow it up with something like, they meet some bad A mercenary with this crazy helmet, or a giant tentacle monster chases after them, or that merchant that the players snubbed earlier comes and complains to the local ruler while the players are trying to get a favor out of him. Now, it's hard to come up with things on the fly. This is why Monte says that he made this list and why it is important for us to make lists of cool ideas. Before you run the game, brainstorm for even just 5 minutes and think of fun, interesting, and unique things. It could be a traveling wizard looking for his estranged daughter, a corporate office worker who is secretly a werewolf, a glowing rock in a dungeon that, when touched, makes you turn into rock for 2 hours, or even something as simple as a spike trap. Getting a list of some ideas will help you better be able to make things up on the fly, because you already made them up. All you then have to do is plug in these ideas into whatever situation would be fun. Product review. A D&D. Dungeons & Dragons. This is the newest edition of Dungeons & Dragons, also called D&D Next and D&D 5th Edition, since it is the 5th edition of the extremely popular role-playing game. This one was created with a hope of encompassing all that is D&D. D&D has gone through a lot of changes over the years, with one of the more radical and recent versions heavily involving little miniature figurines and physical battle maps where you had to actually move stuff around. As well, they kind of borrowed some mechanics typically found in video games such as World of Warcraft and other online games. It's been pretty heavily criticized recently, with a lot of people preferring to default all the way back to the 2nd edition of the rules. So 5th edition is their way of trying to create a game that will appeal to all the various D&D players. A lot of rules have been very heavily streamlined. According to D&D lead designer Mike Merles, the goal of this streamlining was to keep people engaged at the table instead of mining through tons of tables to figure out specific numbers. Haha, tables as in tabular data, not as in tables of dinner, tables where people play the game. around. Okay. Many different statistics have been combined into one. Instead of save versus death, save versus spell, save versus poison, save versus ice giant stepping on you, etc., it's just saving throw. This sort of streamlining is all over the place in D&D now. The need for miniatures has disappeared as the game returns to its 2nd edition roots. Prestige classes, ones that you could pick once you reached a certain threshold of points and certain stats and having certain skills. Like, you start out as a bard, and then if you got, 30 in your unarmed combat skill and 15 in your dex and 20 in your intelligence, then you could become a red dragon disciple. That was all really confusing, so they changed it to, hey, just get to this level and then you can branch out and do whatever you want. You don't have to worry about each specific stat requirement. This kind of created an attitude of having to plan out your character's progression since before birth. And it was kind of tedious, at least for me, so I'm really glad they made that change. Where now I can just say, hey, I'm 5th level. Instead of being a paladin, I'm going to become a holy avenger class and just keep on going there. As far as the books themselves, by all accounts, they're really high quality and filled with just gorgeous art. I personally don't have a lot of experience with this, but it has swayed over even hardcore 2nd edition players, such as YouTube's Koibu, who has started to run his own shows nearly exclusively in 5th edition. As far as the future for the product goes, it's D&D. This baby ain't going away. It's gonna receive support for a long time. Wizards of the Coast actually has a bit of a bad rap for updating too much. In previous editions of D&D, new supplements would come along that would completely contradict a world that the DM has played, and some people had a real problem with that. Basically saying that, hey, Wizards of the Coast, you invalidated my entire campaign because in this new story development, Driss Do'Urden actually killed the liches of the lich spreading across the world like I planned. I mean, whatever, So, but as far as there being more and more and more material to be able to draw from, you're not going to have to worry about that. One thing to consider is price. While the books are very high quality, they are a little pricey. If you bought the DM core rulebook, a player's guide, and the bestiary, the book containing all the monsters in the game, then it would cost you $91.51. Now, this isn't too outlandish for buying 3 books of this quality, but it is higher than the average. Overall, I would say if you've got the cash, I can't imagine a better time to get into D&D. The rough edges of the rules have been sanded down while still maintaining an enjoyable amount of customization and complexity. You can get 5th edition D&D, or as it's actually named, D&D, on Amazon. I've placed a direct link to the DM's core rulebook in the show notes. Be sure to go over there at josephnewelldesign.com/natural20. That's Joseph, NEWELL design.com/natural20. Brainstorm. We're going to be talking about what to do if the DM doesn't know what to do, if he doesn't know what's going to happen. Last week we talked about the players, this week it's the DM. So, first off, it's really important to recognize that this happens to everybody. You expect the players to go down A, B, or C paths, or even better, you have a general idea of the area that they're in, and then they do something completely unexpected. You are left baffled, grasping at straws. You have no idea what to do. One of the biggest ways to help this is that list that we were discussing earlier. Building these lists is a lot like Legos. Every idea we think of is another Lego that we can put into the situation at hand. Using this, you can invent quite a lot, quote unquote, on the fly. Sometimes things have gotten so weird and the players do something so bizarre that you just can't think of anything. That's fine. it is important to recognize that that's completely normal, and it doesn't mean that you're a bad DM. When you are comfortable with this, then communicating that you're stumped is a lot easier to the players. You can just say, hey guys, I have no idea what's going to happen here. Go ahead, take a 5-minute break. I'll figure things out in the meantime. We'll come back and we'll figure things out. Another possible solution is to ask the players. Players driving the content of the game can really help them gain an investment in the world, understand more about their characters and their motivations. For example, the characters want to talk to someone in the know in their hometown. You could then interject as the DM and say, Rogue, you have a contact in this town that sometimes feeds you information. Who is he and how do you know them? Remember, you're not quote-unquote in charge of everybody. The players inform the world, which then helps inform them. Now, a great example of this is one of ItMeJP's roleplay series called Swan Song, where Adam Coble is the DM. They are playing spacefaring bounty hunters trying to pay off the loan on their ship, and they got into a sticky situation, and one of the characters has some deep ties to underground, seedy, black market type characters. And so he called in a contact. Now, Adam Coble, being a very savvy DM, he didn't want to come up with this just by himself. He knew this would be a great opportunity for the player to be able to do something really cool. So, he asked the player, who is this guy? How do you know him? And then the player spent a couple of seconds thinking and said, okay, his name is Bob. I don't remember the real name that he used. And we went on a run a long time ago. We kind of split ways. He's on this planet because of X reason. And so they went and met up, and the DM had a character because of what the player said. The player said, okay, he was a part of this run that we did for this one company. And so, the DM was able to say, okay, he's from this guy's home planet, working for the same company. He probably has a similar sort of accent, similar sort of behavior patterns. I'm going to use what I know of that, and I'm going to make a new character. And it fleshed to life incredibly quickly, this very good and deep character. Now, the real magic for me is what happened after they met the guy. Because they met him and he kind of became enamored with the girl character and, was wanting to have a chance to ask her out on a date and everything. And it was like, a really sweet moment. And that was actually really smart in Adam Coble's thing. Once again, taking something in the game and relating it to one specific individual player, getting them really invested. And they cooperate with this guy and make this deal, and they're going to take him to another planet for him in exchange for help getting off the planet that they're currently on. And he's just a nice guy. He's like, hey, we've worked together in the past. I know you. You're a great guy. I want to help you out, and you just scratch my back. I'll scratch yours. Well, they get off the planet. They're in the ship, and the guy walks over trying to, talk to the girl, trying to get a date. And then the character who knows this guy, who made the character in the first place, comes up behind him, pulls out his pistol, and shoots him in the head. And it was a really stunning moment. Everyone was left kind of flabbergasted. And then he said, yeah, that guy's a jerk. I worked him in the past. He ran away before. He was going to do it again. I'm just saving us some trouble. And he walked off. Can you see how awesome this makes a character? How it helps players get that investment in the world where they can play their character. It's not just about, having the town mayor find the players in the pub, sending them out to a dungeon. The players can create these really cool scenarios for themselves. They don't need the DM to hold their hand on that. Let the players take over a lot more. Let them take control of what their players are going to do, certain situations that they're in, and you'll find that everything becomes a lot more fun. Everyone becomes more invested, more willing to roleplay, more willing to interact with things in a meaningful way. Do you have any ideas about how to help a new DM figure out what's happening in a difficult situation? Head on over to josephnewelldesign.com/natural20 and leave a comment on the episode. That's Joseph, Newell, design.com/natural20. And let's get a discussion going and gather a whole lot more tools to help us be able to work even better on the fly. So to summarize, back in Expert Hearsay, we talked about Monte Cook's recent blog post about how he prepared for games. Remember, those lists are extremely useful tools. They'll help you work on the fly, help get the players engaged, help them feel like a part of the world. For our product review, we talked about D&D, the 5th edition. I heavily recommend it. Rules have been streamlined quite a bit, and it's very friendly to new players. The price tag is a little bit high for entry, but it's not anything outlandish. And finally, in Brainstorm, we talked about what the GM could do if he doesn't know what's going to happen. Just remember, it's fine. Everybody has that happen to them. Be willing to say, hey, I need a break, or use the lists that we talked about to help prevent that sort of a situation from happening. Also, don't be afraid to let the players come in with input. Ask them what they're doing, ask them how they're going to do it, and then ask them what the situation is that's going to allow them to do that. Let them make the world too. Don't forget to go to josephnewelldesign.com/natural20 for any news and updates, as well as checking out the show notes for today. I've placed the link to Monte Cook's blog post in there, so you can read it in entirety for yourself. I would recommend it. Especially, I've also put in the link to the D&D core rulebook on Amazon. Now, if you don't want to take the jump in and go right into that, feel free to download the starter set for free from dnd.wizards.com. That's in the show notes as well. I would heavily recommend that to see if it is your cup of tea, and there's plenty there to get you guys started. That's it for me, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye, and may you roll plenty of 20s.